The executive rooftop shimmered under noon sun, glass and steel reflecting clouds like a second sky. A sleek helicopter sat tethered on the helipad, rotors still, cockpit gleaming. Laughter spilt from the gathered crowd, board members in tailored suits, a photographer angling for the shot, a CEO in heels and confidence. She pointed at the janitor, refilling the water cooler by the door, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. A bet, a dare, a joke wrapped in cruelty. Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you. The crowd erupted. He set the water jug down, wiped his hands on his coveralls, and walked toward the cockpit without a word. If you believe that kindness and hidden strength deserve to be seen, like this video and subscribe to Kindness Wins. His name was Sam, though most people didn't ask. He'd worked at the corporate tower for 3 years. Night shift mostly. The hours when the building exhaled and emptied. He mopped lobbies that gleamed like mirrors, emptied bins filled with crumpled drafts of million-dollar pitches, and wiped conference tables where decisions were made that he'd never be part of. He moved through the space like water, necessary and invisible. Before the tower, before the coveralls and the early alarm that split sleep in half, Sam had worn a different uniform, flight suit, helmet with his call sign stitched above the visor. He'd flown rescue missions over open ocean, brought stranded hikers off cliffs in bad weather, and landed choppers on ships rolling in 15-foot swells. 22 years of rotor wash and adrenaline, then a quiet retirement with a pension that covered rent and left a little over. He didn't talk about it because nobody asked, and because humility had been drilled into him longer than flight procedure. People saw what they expected. A man with a mop, a badge that said maintenance, boots that squeaked on wet tile. The executive class treated him the way scenery gets treated. Acknowledged when broken, ignored when functional. He didn't mind. He'd learned long ago that respect isn't always visible and that the loudest voices rarely understand the quietest strengths. On the morning of the rooftop event, a corporate PR stunt to unveil the company's new executive transport solution, Sam had been called up to restock the beverage station. The event coordinator didn't meet his eyes when she pointed to the corner. He set up waters and sparkling cider in neat rows, adjusted napkins, and stayed in his lane. He caught bits of the CEO's speech. Innovation, vision, the future takes flight. The helicopter gleamed like a trophy behind her. Guests sipped drinks and posed for photos. It was a celebration of things most of them would never personally touch, until she saw him, smiled like a predator, and made her joke. The dare hung in the air, bright and sharp. Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you. A few guests laughed nervously. Others leaned in, phones already recording. The CEO, Helen, her name in gold on every quarterly report, repeated it with theatrical confidence, as if the punchline was the ask itself. The idea that the janitor could fly was, to her, absurd. The crowd fed on the absurdity. One board member whispered, "Someone should stop this." No one did. Sam felt the weight of every eye. He could have smiled, shaken his head, and returned to the service hallway. That's what invisible people do. They let the joke finish and move on. But something older than this job stirred in his chest. Not anger, certainty, the kind of calm that comes from having flown into worse situations with less margin for error. He walked to the helicopter. Each step turned the laughter quieter. Helen's smile tightened at the edges, the joke suddenly requiring a punchline she hadn't scripted. A security officer stepped forward, unsure whether to intervene. The photographer lowered his camera, instinct sensing the narrative had shifted. Sam ran his hand along the fuselage the way you greeted an old friend, checked the tail rotor with a glance born from muscle memory, and opened the cockpit door. Inside, the instruments made sense in a language he still spoke fluently. Cyclic, collective, pedals. Positions his hands found without thought. He adjusted the seat, flipped a few switches in a sequence that doesn't come from a manual, and let the pre-flight checklist run in his head like a song he'd never forget. The crowd pressed to the safety line. Helen's smile was gone. Someone asked if he was serious. He didn't answer. He turned the ignition and the rotors coughed to life. The sound swallowed the rooftop. Low and building, a rhythm that turned air into pressure. Dust lifted. Napkins tumbled. Guests shielded their eyes. The helicopter trembled, then steadied as Sam brought the turbine to operating range with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times in far worse conditions. He didn't showboat. He didn't make it about the crowd. He lifted off 6 feet, smooth as glass, hovered for a beat that felt like forever, then set it back down with the gentleness of someone who respects machinery and the people who might need it next. Engine off. Rotors winding down. Silence sharper than the joke had been. Sam stepped out of the cockpit and latched the door the way regulation required. He didn't bow. He didn't gloat. He adjusted his coveralls, wiped a smudge of hydraulic fluid from his thumb, and walked back toward the beverage station to finish the setup he'd started. The crowd parted without being asked. Helen stood frozen, the crisp lines of her authority rumpled by confusion and something closer to awe. The board member who had whispered earlier now spoke aloud, directing a question to the event coordinator. "Who is that?" The coordinator, pale and stammering, checked a tablet. "Sam Wilder, facilities, 3 years." Another guest, older, with a military bearing, stepped forward. He recognized the call sign. Sam had worn on a jacket slung over a locker. Downstairs, one the younger. Staff had never noticed. He'd served in the same branch, different decade. Same respect for the ones who flew into the hard calls. He crossed the helipad, extended a hand, and said the only thing that mattered, "Thank you for your service." Sam shook it, firm, brief. The handshake of people who don't need an audience to understand what it means. A photographer, realizing the shot he'd missed, raised the camera. Sam turned his back to the lens. Helen approached slowly, the joke now a mirror she didn't want to look into. She tried to recover, started a sentence about not knowing about impressive skills, about something. Sam interrupted gently. "You made an offer. I don't need the ring. But next time, maybe ask before you assume." His voice wasn't cruel. It was clear. The kind of correction that lands without wounding because the truth does the work. The event coordinator scrambled to shift the program. But the energy had already changed. Guests asked questions. Where did you fly? How long? What kind of missions? And Sam answered a few, deflected others, and slowly made his way back inside. A janitor again. But now the hallways noticed him differently. A few nodded. One offered to carry a supply box. Helen stood on the helipad long after the crowd dispersed, looking at the helicopter, like it had just taught her something. She should have known all along. By next Monday, word had spread. Not in headlines, corporate. Didn't love admitting a CEO had publicly. Underestimated staff, but in the quiet, powerful way. Respect travels through a building. The night crew learned first. Then, facility managers. Then, through careful whispers, the executive floor. Sam's locker, once bare, sprouted notes. "Thank you." "Respect." One card simply said, "Hero." Helen didn't issue a company-wide apology. Lawyers probably advised against it. But she did something quieter and more meaningful. She funded a scholarship for veterans, transitioning to civilian roles, and named it after the qualities she'd failed to see. Humility, skill, and service. She didn't name Sam, but everyone who mattered knew. She also visited him one early morning in the break room. Had no cameras, had no script, and said 2 words. Many leaders forget, "I'm sorry." Sam kept mopping floors. Not because he had to, the pension was enough, but because purpose doesn't always wear a uniform. Some mornings, he'd chat with new hires and offer advice on finding work that felt steady. On weekends, he volunteered at a local airfield, teaching kids about flight in a way that centered safety, respect, and wonder over ego. The helicopter bet became a story people told to remember what assumptions cost. Here's what lingered. Dignity doesn't need an audience, and strength doesn't need to shout. The people we overlook often carry histories we can't imagine and skills we'll never see unless we choose to ask instead of assume. Titles don't measure worth. Respect does. If this story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Wins, to keep these life-changing stories alive. Drop a comment below. Tell us what part moved you the most. Your words might inspire someone else.